When I was a kid, my brown skin and my turban were often the first things people saw. Before my voice, before my name. Sometimes those first impressions turned into words that reached me only to remind me that I was different. And when that happened, I would go quiet. And sometimes, somewhere inside myself, I still wonder, why didn't I stand up to racism? Why didn't I free myself from the shackles of my skin, rid myself of this burden I was born with, the burden of my colour? But some days, I didn't have it in me to fight. Some days, I'd rather just be a human than a hero. So as a kid, I learned to turn these closed hands into promises, swallow these fists of anger back into the silence from which they were born, and from that silence, I chose to use love as my weapon. My father taught me about love. He came to New Zealand carrying in a suitcase a history, a culture, and a desire for a better life. When he arrived, he met stares, silence, and even words that tried to make him smaller. But he never let them. And when I'll tell my father at school, hands reach out in disrespectful curiosity to touch my turban, he would remind me, son, they can put a hand on your history, but they can never touch your soul. So I stand here the same way he did, 26 years ago, unmoved, unfazed, unbroken, wearing proudly both my past and my pride. My father, he speaks in the language of resilience, tongue heavy with sacrifice, yet light enough to carry the weight of me to a future he never had. Through his tired limbs of labour's weight, he stitched wings from worn-out dreams. My dad taught me to fly, taught me to listen. But outside of that love, the world can feel much different, like a courtroom. In a courtroom, two witnesses can watch the same event and tell two different stories. And in life, two people can meet the same person and have two different views of them. So how do we know who's right? In the courtroom of life, we don't listen to others, we listen instead to a version of others we've built from a first glance. And when we do this, we replace people with our expectations of them. In the courtroom of life, the most powerful moment isn't when someone speaks. It's when someone feels heard. Too many people in our society are unheard and isolated because their stories are constantly filtered through stereotypes. A 2021 Ministry of Health survey found that the most common form of racism in Aotearoa is verbal racism. Words spoken before anyone takes the time to listen. As a kid, I used to mistake assimilation for belonging, thinking that the price of being let in was to let go of parts of myself, to smooth my edges until I fit a shape the world would find less threatening, less different. Whakarongo ki a marama, listening to understand changes everything. When we learn to listen beyond what we see, we break down the barriers that create isolation and replace them with genuine connection. In the courtroom of life, there is a powerful difference between listening to rebut and listening to understand. So let me show you what I mean. Close your eyes for a moment. Imagine a taxi driver, a fast food worker, someone stacking shelves late at night. Now ask yourself, who did you see? Because I never described the face, and yet most of us saw colour. How do we confront racism if we don't even recognize it in ourselves? For that answer, we can look again at a courtroom. The problem in society is that too many of us listen like lawyers, listen waiting for our turn to challenge, waiting for flaws, waiting to defend what we think we know. That's listening to rebut, not listening to understand. Instead of listening like lawyers, we must listen like judges. Judges are trained to recognize their own bias, to set aside assumptions, to remove personal filters before reaching a verdict. That's listening to understand. In a courtroom, if a judge was to decide the verdict before hearing the evidence, the trial becomes meaningless. And in life, if I've already decided who you are before you speak, then my listening is just a performance, a waste of time. Diversity alone does not create racial harmony. You can put 100 different voices in the same room and still have no understanding. Racial harmony isn't built by pretending we're all the same. It's built when we take responsibility for the assumptions we all carry. Prejudice survives when stereotypes go unchallenged. Challenging stereotypes means questioning the stories we've been taught. As Martin Luther King Jr. once said, darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. And perhaps one of the simplest ways we bring light to this world is by learning to truly listen. One way we can do this is through a government-backed, youth-led national initiative, a digital platform where students share their whakapapa to teach others about their culture. By learning about others, we break down stereotypes and create empathy. In schools, cultural understanding must be active through workshops led by young people, for young people. Importantly, when youth lead the conversation, we don't just create unity. We build a national dialogue that creates racial harmony. Understanding becomes acceptance. Listening alone is not enough. The action that must follow listening is change. If I was to listen to your story and nothing about me changed, then I just listened. I never understood. Listening to understand will always leave evidence behind. Evidence like challenging a stereotype instead of choosing silence. Like saying someone's name or standing up for someone when they're made to feel different. In the courtroom of life, after every voice has been heard, after every story has been told, a verdict must be made. And often the trial reveals less about the person on the stand and more about the integrity of the one listening. Life is no different. Every day in the quiet courtrooms of our own conversations, we form our own verdicts. Sometimes before the first word has even spoken. ਗੱਲ ਸੁਣ ਕੇ ਹੀ ਗੱਲ ਸਮਝ ਆਉਂਦੀ ਹੈ. Only by truly listening can a message truly be understood. When I was a kid, my skin was my burden. Now it's my blessing. I've come to realize the burden we all carry are our biases. We must learn to listen beyond what we see, because in the courtroom of life, every assumption is a verdict. And a verdict, once delivered, is hard to overturn. Whakarongo ki a marama, listening to understand doesn't end with judgments. It begins with responsibility. A shared responsibility to pause before we decide. To listen before we judge. Not to respond. Not to defend. But to truly understand.